Today's story is going to be one that is very close to home for me. Growing up as someone who was, and still is, really into what you could call alternative subculture, this really shook me to my core at the time, and still does to this day. I am talking about the tragic murder of Sophie Lancaster, a 20-year-old with her whole life ahead of her, whose life was taken for daring to be different. Sophie was a sensitive and intelligent girl, growing up in Lancashire, England. She was known for being creative and had decided to take a gap year between her studies before she started a degree in English. She lived with her partner of 2 years, Rob Maltby, who she shared a love of all things gothic with. They were both really creative people and were self-described goths, with Sophie regularly having her hair dyed bright colours and styled in dreadlocks. So, at approximately 1:10 in the morning, on Saturday the 11th of August, Sophie and her boyfriend were walking to their home when they happened to pass a group of teenagers at the entrance of S.O.P.H.I.E Park, a fairly large recreation area in Bacup. The teenagers followed them, shouting horrible things at them before physically assaulting Rob, knocking him unconscious. The group of attackers outnumbered Sophie and Rob by 5-2. Naturally, Sophie wanted to protect her boyfriend, and so shielded him from further blows while cradling his bleeding head. This meant the gang turned their attention from Rob onto her. They kicked Sophie repeatedly, including blows to the head, causing her to be knocked unconscious. Once the pair were both lying unconscious on the floor, a 14-year-old girl called emergency services crying, telling them, We need an ambulance at Bacup Park. This mosher has just been banged because he's a mosher." Emergency services rushed out and got to Rob and Sophie, and what they came across was absolutely horrifying. They said that the injuries that they had sustained were so severe that they could not tell who was who initially. They were both rushed to hospital where they both remained in a coma. Rob was suffering with internal bleeding, having endured a huge number of injuries, including 14 separate injuries to his head and neck, 7 to his arm and 1 to his leg. Despite this, Rob did eventually recover from his physical injuries, but suffered terribly with the psychological effects of this attack, and he has stated that he suffers with memory loss. Then there was Sophie. Sophie, still in a coma, was placed on life support and moved to a special neurology ward at Hope Hospital in Salford. I don't want to describe Sophie's injuries in detail, but she had many of them, including facial injuries and defensive wounds. The forensic pathologist assigned to the case stated that some of the injuries were consistent with being stamped on, as they showed what looked like parts of a shoe print. Sophie remained in a coma for 2 weeks, but despite medical staff's best efforts, her injuries were too severe, and doctors had to deliver the heartbreaking news to Sophie's family that she would never regain consciousness. Her family made the incredibly difficult but brave decision to turn off her life support, and she slipped away on the 24th of August 2007, at just 20 years old. Behind the scenes, while Sophie and Rob were in hospital, police got to work trying to find the culprits of this vicious attack. Within days they had arrested 5 people, as well as interviewing several others that were in the park on the night that Sophie and Rob were attacked. As Sophie did not die immediately from her injuries as she was on life support, the suspects were initially charged with grievous bodily harm. However, when news came that Sophie had died from her injuries, these charges were escalated to murder. At the time, the names of the arrested were not revealed. However, there was a reason for this. Astoundingly, the people that were arrested for this totally heinous attack were just teenagers. After the trial, the boys' names were released, so we can talk about them. The boys arrested were Ryan Herbert, 16, Brendan Harris, 15, brothers Joseph and Danny Hume, 15 and 17, and Daniel Mallet, 17. It just shocks me so much to hear those ages. The boys were a group of local teenagers that were known for having a history of binge drinking and causing trouble. They often hung around in S.O.P.H.I.E Park, where local residents described the place as a hotspot for drunk and violent yobs who were guilty of vandalism and drinking underage. The suspects were formally charged on the 6th of September of that year, with the trial due to begin in the following March. Both Ryan Herbert and Brendan Harris were remanded in custody, while the other 3 boys were released on bail until the trial. At the start of the trial in March, Ryan Herbert pled guilty to the murder of Sophie and the grievous bodily harm of Rob, and the other 4 boys pled guilty to grievous bodily harm. This plea was accepted, and the murder charge dropped for the 2 Hume brothers and Daniel Mallet, but Brendan Harris's murder charge was not dropped despite him pleading not guilty. Because of this, a trial commenced for just Brendan Harris to determine his guilt in the murder of Sophie. A number of witnesses gave evidence about the attacks, and following all evidence being heard, the jury from the trial took just a few hours to come to the decision that Brendan Harris was guilty of the murder of Sophie Lancaster. The sentences were then handed out, and they were as follows. Harris and Herbert were sentenced to life imprisonment, with the recommendation that Harris serve at least 18 years and Herbert at least 16 years and 3 months. For their part in the crime, the Hume brothers were sentenced to 5 years and 10 months each, and Daniel Mallet 4 years and 4 months. Since the conviction, there have been several appeals from the defendants hoping to get lesser sentences. The majority of these have been rejected, although Herbert did have his sentence reduced to 14.5 years due to exceptional progress he had made in jail. Tell me what you think about the reduction in sentencing. I am really interested to hear people's opinions for and against good behaviour recognition and how it affects offenders and their victims. Since the trial, Sophie's name has never been forgotten. Due to the amazing work carried out by the Sophie Lancaster Foundation, Sophie has a legacy that will live on for years. The Foundation works to provide educational group works that challenge the prejudice and intolerance people from alternative subcultures may face. They've also campaigned to have attacks on alternative subcultures included in hate crime legislation. The foundation is run by Sophie's mother Sylvia, who has done an outstanding job of spreading the message of the Sophie Lancaster Foundation by being a keynote speaker at conferences, as well as manning Sophie stalls at alternative music festivals such as Bloodstock and Download Festival here in the UK. Bloodstock Festival even renamed their second stage the Sophie Lancaster Stage in 2009 and have kept the name ever since. Recently, there has been a storyline in the British soap Coronation Street, which has parallels to Sophie and Rob's story. The Sophie Lancaster Foundation worked closely with them to create this storyline, showing that despite everything that has happened, Sophie's story is still an incredibly important one that continues to be spoken about to this day. I hope I've done Sophie justice in the telling of this story, as this is my first video, but I had to make it as it really was one of the events that shook me. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts on the case, and if Sophie's story affected you growing up. I've left the information for the Sophie Lancaster Foundation in the description to this video, so please go and check them out and see the work that they continue to do to this day. If you like this video and would like to hear more about the events that shook me, please like the video and subscribe for hopefully weekly videos. See you next time.